After my father passed away, my ruthless husband and sister-in-law demanded a share of my $150 million inheritance. When I refused, they attacked me with a chair in a fit of rage, leaving me with a head injury. I was unconscious, but thankfully, my friend rushed me to the hospital and saved my life. When I opened my eyes in the hospital, I was shocked to see. My name is Rebecca Clark, and for a long time, I thought I had everything one could wish for: a loving husband, a beautiful home, and a legacy that meant the world to me. But as I sit here today, ready to share my story, I realize how fragile that illusion was and how greed can turn the people you trust the most into strangers. I inherited my father's $150 million fortune when he passed away last year. It wasn't just money to me. It was his legacy, built through years of tireless work in real estate. He was a man of principles, someone who believed in using wealth to help others. I promised him on his deathbed that I would honor his wishes, using the inheritance for charitable causes and protecting the family name. At first, Eric, my husband, seemed supportive. He was everything I thought I needed: charming, intelligent, and someone who understood my ambitions. We lived in a spacious Manhattan townhouse, surrounded by all the luxuries that came with success. But the moment my father's will was read, things began to change. Eric, who had always claimed to value love over money, suddenly became obsessed with the fortune. "Rebecca, we could do so much with that money," he would say, his tone casual but insistent. "A vacation home in the Hamptons, investments that could double its value. Why not think about us for once?" I tried to explain it to him. The money wasn't just ours to spend. It was my father's dream to help people, to build something lasting. But every time I said no, the tension between us grew thicker. I didn't realize at the time, but Eric wasn't just frustrated. He was plotting. The real trouble began when Charlotte, Eric's older sister, got involved. Charlotte was complicated, to say the least. She was 40, unmarried, and perpetually bitter about her position in life. Unlike Eric, she didn't bother hiding her disdain. "Rebecca," she once sneered, "you're sitting on a gold mine, and you're too stubborn to see it. Do you have any idea how many people would kill for this kind of money?" Her words unsettled me, but I brushed them off. I thought I could handle her passive-aggressive remarks, her constant meddling. After all, she was family. But looking back, that was my first mistake, underestimating her. Things escalated when I found Eric and Charlotte whispering in the living room late one night. I couldn't hear much, but I caught words like power of attorney and legal loophole. When I confronted Eric, he brushed it off with a laugh. "You're imagining things, Becky. You've been under so much stress lately." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But deep down, a seed of doubt had already been planted. The final straw came one afternoon when Charlotte barged into my office uninvited. "Rebecca," she said, her voice sharp, "this isn't just about you anymore. That money belongs to Eric too. You're being selfish." Her words stung, but I stood my ground. "It's not about being selfish, Charlotte. It's about doing what's right. My father trusted me with this responsibility." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something dangerous in her expression. "Responsibility," she spat. "You have no idea what you're doing." The tension in the house became unbearable. Eric and Charlotte were always scheming, always whispering. They thought I didn't notice, but I did. I started locking my office door, keeping my documents hidden. I even considered hiring a lawyer, but a part of me still hoped things would settle down. That hope shattered the night of the robbery. It was a quiet evening. I was alone in the living room, reading through some old letters from my father, when I heard a crash. I barely had time to react before someone lunged at me, a figure in a ski mask, holding what looked like a chair. I screamed, struggling to get away, but the next thing I knew, pain exploded in my head. Everything went blurry, and I collapsed to the floor. When I woke up, I was in the hospital, my head bandaged and my body aching. The police said it looked like a random break-in, but something didn't add up. Why hadn't anything been stolen? And why did the robber seem to know exactly where I'd be? As I lay there, piecing things together, I realized the horrifying truth. This wasn't a random attack. It was Charlotte. And if Charlotte was behind it, Eric had to be involved too. That was the moment everything changed. I decided then and there that I wouldn't be a victim. If they wanted to play dirty, I would fight back, but on my terms. When I woke up in that hospital bed, everything felt like a bad dream. My head throbbed, my vision was blurry, and my body ached from the attack. But the worst pain wasn't physical. It was the betrayal. The people I had trusted the most, Eric and Charlotte, had turned on me for money. My father's money. I knew I couldn't sit back and let them win. I had to fight, and to do that I needed a plan. The first thing I did was pretend I couldn't remember anything about the attack. When the doctor asked if I recalled what happened, I shook my head and said, "I don't know, everything's so fuzzy." The police visited to take my statement, but I gave them nothing. I saw the skepticism in their eyes, but I didn't care. The less I said, the better. Eric arrived later that evening, putting on the performance of a lifetime. "Becky," he said, rushing to my side, "I'm so sorry this happened to you. I've been worried sick." He held my hand, but it felt cold, almost calculated. "I don't remember much," I murmured, studying his reaction. His face relaxed, and I knew my act was working. Charlotte visited the next day, bringing flowers and wearing a mask of concern. "Rebecca, this is awful," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Do you have any idea who could have done this?" I wanted to scream at her, to tell her I knew exactly who was responsible, but I forced myself to stay calm. Instead, I shrugged weakly. "I don't know. Maybe a burglar?" Her lips curled into a small, satisfied smile. "Well, you're lucky to be alive. That's all that matters." Lucky? That word hung in the air, taunting me. No, I wasn't lucky. I was furious. But I wasn't going to let them see it. Not yet. Once I was discharged from the hospital, I returned home to find things exactly as I had left them, except for Eric and Charlotte. They were everywhere, hovering like vultures. I played along, acting confused and fragile, while secretly planning my next move. I knew I needed evidence, something irrefutable that would expose them. So, I bought a small recording device and hid it in my home office, the one place I knew Eric and Charlotte wouldn't resist snooping around. The opportunity came quicker than I expected. One afternoon, I pretended to go out for a walk but stayed close enough to eavesdrop. Sure enough, as soon as they thought I was gone, Eric and Charlotte began talking in the office. "I told you you hit her too hard," Eric hissed. "Don't blame me," Charlotte shot back. She was supposed to be scared enough to hand over control of the money. How was I supposed to know she'd end up in the hospitals? I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay quiet. My heart raced, as their words confirmed everything I already knew. "Well, now she doesn't even remember anything," Eric said, his tone cold. "We just have to push her a little more. Get her to sign something, anything that gives me access to the funds, and if she doesn't?" Charlotte asked. "Then we'll find another way," Eric replied. "We always do." Their voices faded as they left the room, but my mind was spinning. The recording was clear enough, and it was only the beginning. I needed more, proof of their long-term scheme to take everything from me. Over the next few weeks, I played the perfect role of the confused and helpless wife. I'd sit in the living room, staring blankly at the TV, pretending to be too disoriented to focus. Eric, thinking I was too weak to notice, grew bolder. He started leaving financial documents out in the open, thinking I wouldn't understand their significance. But I did. One evening, while Eric was out, I rifled through his desk and found a folder labeled Trust Fund Revisions. Inside were drafts of documents attempting to grant Eric access to my inheritance under the guise of financial management. He'd even forged my signature on a few. I photographed everything and emailed it to myself, creating a digital trail they couldn't erase. It was a small victory, but it fueled me to keep going. The most damning evidence came during a family dinner Charlotte insisted on hosting. She and Eric clearly wanted to keep an eye on me, but they underestimated my resolve. I brought the same recording device in my purse, hiding it under the table. Charlotte poured wine and leaned in close, her voice low. "Rebecca," she said sweetly, "you know Eric and I only want what's best for you. We're family after all." Of course, I replied, keeping my tone light. But you're not thinking clearly, she continued. It's obvious you need help managing things. If you just sign over some of the responsibilities to Eric, we could take all the stress off your shoulders. I played dumb, nodding along. Maybe you're right. I'll think about it. That was all they needed to hear. By the end of the night, I had more than enough recorded evidence of their plans to manipulate me into giving up my inheritance. As I sat alone that night, replaying the recordings and reviewing the documents, I felt a mixture of relief and rage. I finally had the proof I needed, but their betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. These were the people who were supposed to care for me, and they'd treated me like a pawn in their greedy little game. But the game wasn't over. Not yet. I decided it was time to stop playing defense. If Eric and Charlotte wanted to destroy me, they'd have to pay the price. And I knew exactly how to make it happen. I knew I couldn't fight Eric and Charlotte quietly anymore. They had crossed every line, and it was time to take control. But if I was going to bring them down, I had to do it in a way they'd never see coming. They thought I was weak, fragile, and clueless. That was their mistake, and I was about to show them how wrong they were. I decided to host a grand charity gala in New York City. It was something my father had always done annually to support causes he cared about, and it gave me the perfect stage to expose Eric and Charlotte's betrayal. I knew the event would draw attention from prominent figures, friends, and family, creating the perfect audience for what I had planned. I spent weeks preparing, all while maintaining my act. Every time Eric asked about my progress on recovering my memory, I would shrug and say, "Nothing yet, but I'm trying." Charlotte, ever the schemer, visited often, offering her help while subtly pressuring me to give Eric control of the inheritance. Their confidence in my helplessness was their downfall. The day of the gala arrived, and the venue was stunning. The ballroom was adorned with elegant chandeliers, floral arrangements, and banners celebrating the charitable organizations we'd be supporting that night. Guests in tuxedos and gowns began to arrive, filling the room with chatter and laughter. Eric and Charlotte were there, of course, mingling as though they hadn't spent the past few months plotting my ruin. "Rebecca, this is incredible," Eric said, placing a hand on my shoulder as we greeted guests together. "You've really outdone yourself." "Thanks," I replied with a polite smile. Tonight's going to be unforgettable. If only he knew how true that was. As the evening progressed, I gave a short speech about my father's legacy, thanking everyone for attending. I could see Eric and Charlotte standing near the front, smiling like they were part of my success. My stomach churned at the sight, but I pushed my emotions aside. The time for action had come. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, "before we continue with tonight's program, I have something very important to share. It's personal, but I believe it's something everyone here deserves to know." The room fell silent as I walked over to a large screen at the front of the ballroom. I nodded to the technician, and the recordings I'd gathered over the past few weeks began to play. The first clip was from my office, where Eric and Charlotte discussed the attack. Their voices echoed through the room, unmistakable and damning. "I told you hit her too hard," Eric hissed. "Don't blame me," Charlotte snapped. She was supposed to be scared enough to hand over control of the money. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I could see people exchanging shocked glances, whispering to one another. Eric's face turned pale, and Charlotte's jaw dropped as she realized what was happening. The second recording played, this one from the family dinner. It captured Charlotte's attempts to manipulate me, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "If you'd just sign over some of the responsibilities to Eric, we could take all the stress off your shoulders," she cooed. By the time the recordings finished, the room was in an uproar. Guests were horrified, muttering about the audacity and betrayal on display. Eric tried to step forward, his face a mask of desperation. "Rebecca, wait. This isn't what it sounds like," he stammered. I ignored him, turning to address the audience. "These are the people I trusted most in the world. My husband and his sister conspired to rob me of my inheritance, using lies, manipulation, and violence. But their greed blinded them to one simple truth: I will not be a victim." The shock wasn't over yet. I held up a folder, pausing for effect before continuing. "And now, for the final revelation. My father's will. Eric and Charlotte froze. They hadn't expected this. This, I said, opening the folder, is a legal document my father helped me prepare years ago. It supersedes all other arrangements. Effective immediately, every penny of the $150 million inheritance will be redirected to the charitable organizations my father loved so dearly. Neither Eric nor Charlotte will receive a single dollar. The crowd erupted into applause, but I barely heard it. I was watching Eric and Charlotte, their expressions shifting from shock to fury. For once, they were utterly powerless. Of course, I didn't stop there. After the gala, I handed all the evidence to the authorities. The recordings, the forged documents, and even testimony from a few of Charlotte's former friends who'd come forward after seeing the gala revelations. It was more than enough to charge them with assault, conspiracy, and fraud. A week later, the police arrived at our home. I stood by the window, watching as Eric and Charlotte were handcuffed and led away. Eric tried to make eye contact with me, but I turned away. There was nothing left to say. Watching them face the consequences of their actions should have brought me relief, but all I felt was sadness. Not for them, but for the people I thought they were. The husband I once loved and the sister-in-law I tried to welcome into my life had been nothing more than masks hiding their greed. But their downfall wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would rebuild my life on my own terms, free from their shadows. As I watched Eric and Charlotte being led away in handcuffs, I thought I would feel triumphant, even vindicated. After all, I had exposed their betrayal, turned their schemes against them, and ensured they faced justice. But what I felt was something deeper, a sense of closure, a clean break from the toxic hold they had on my life. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. The recordings, the forged documents, and the testimony from others painted a crystal-clear picture of Eric and Charlotte's guilt. Charlotte, desperate to reduce her sentence, turned on Eric, confirming every detail of their conspiracy. The staged robbery, the assault, the attempts to manipulate me into signing over control of my inheritance, it all came out in court. Eric sat silently throughout the trial, his polished demeanor shattered. He looked like a man who had lost everything, and in truth, he had. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Both Eric and Charlotte were sentenced to prison for conspiracy, fraud, and assault. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to. Justice had been served, and my presence wasn't required to make it official. The hardest part wasn't their punishment. It was rebuilding my life. For so long, my world had revolved around the people who betrayed me. Now I was free, but freedom came with its own challenges. I began by focusing on the charities my father loved. The $150 million inheritance had been redirected to organizations that supported housing for underprivileged families, educational scholarships, and environmental conservation. Knowing the money was making a difference helped me heal, but it also made me reflect on how easily it could have been stolen. I started sharing my story, not as a tale of revenge, but as a lesson about resilience and integrity. I gave interviews, spoke at events, and even wrote articles about the dangers of unchecked greed and the importance of staying true to your values. People were fascinated by how I had turned such a painful experience into a platform for advocacy, and their support reminded me that I wasn't alone. One of the most emotional moments came when I visited my father's favorite charity, a small organization that built affordable housing in struggling communities. I met families who had been given a fresh start thanks to the funds I donated. Seeing their smiles, hearing their stories, it reminded me of why I had fought so hard to protect my father's legacy. There was a woman named Maria, a single mother of 3, who told me, "Your father's work changed our lives. And now, so has yours. Thank you." Her words stayed with me. In that moment, I felt my father's presence, as though he was telling me he was proud of the choices I'd made. Meanwhile, I made changes in my personal life. I sold the Manhattan townhouse, where so much of the drama had unfolded. It was a beautiful home, but it carried too many painful memories. I moved to a quieter place on the outskirts of the city, a house surrounded by trees and open spaces, a sanctuary where I could truly start fresh. Friends and family who had stood by me during the ordeal became my rock. They reminded me that not everyone was like Eric and Charlotte, that trust could be rebuilt in the right circumstances. Slowly, I began to open up again, though I remained cautious. Betrayal leaves scars, but it also teaches you to value the people who genuinely care. One day, I received a letter from Eric. It came from the prison where he was serving his sentence. At first, I hesitated to open it, unsure if I wanted to hear anything he had to say. But curiosity got the better of me. The letter was surprisingly short. Eric apologized for everything he had done, claiming he had been consumed by greed and pressure from Charlotte. "I don't expect your forgiveness," he wrote, "but I hope you find peace, as I am trying to." I didn't know if his words were genuine or just another manipulation, but I chose not to dwell on it. His apology, sincere or not, didn't matter. I had already found my peace, and I wasn't going to let his words pull me back into the past. Looking back, I see how the experience changed me. It taught me the importance of boundaries, of trusting my instincts, and of standing up for myself. It also showed me the power of resilience, the ability to take something devastating and turn it into an opportunity for growth. I've since dedicated my life to philanthropy, ensuring that my father's legacy lives on through the lives we've touched. The $150 million that Eric and Charlotte tried so hard to steal has become a force for good, helping thousands of people in ways they never imagined. But perhaps the greatest victory is this: I am free. Free from the shadows of betrayal, free from the weight of their greed, and free to live the life I choose. To anyone listening to my story, I want you to know this: no matter how dark things may seem, there is always a way forward. Betrayal may break your trust, but it doesn't have to break you. Stand firm, fight for what you believe in, and never let anyone make you feel powerless. That's the legacy my father left me, and it's the one I hope to leave for others. As I finish telling my story, I feel a sense of relief, as though a chapter of my life has truly come to an end. And now I look forward to what comes next, not with fear, but with hope.